It's Tua time in Atlanta, and it feels like the Falcons are more invested in threading the needle versus moving the needle with their new quarterback.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network in all of the galaxy. And I am your humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. the iron that sharpens the iron, aka Mr. AKA, and I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong here on Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. And on today's daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, we are talking about Tua Tagovailoa, with the Falcons agreeing to terms with the recently cut quarterback, and that move will be made official later this week on Wednesday. And we'll talk about why the Falcons are choosing Tua over a few of the other quarterback options, the alternative options, what he's bringing to the table, and if he's just a left-handed version of Kirk Cousins that we've seen the last couple of years. And we'll also break down how this is going to impact Michael Penix's status and future here in Atlanta. But in case you missed it, we did do a breakdown on a previous episode looking at the Falcons' other 5 free agents that they signed on Monday. So scroll up or down in your feeds if you want to hear my thoughts on Olamide Zaccheaus, Austin Hooper, Jahan Dotson, Nick Folk, and Jake Bailey and what they're bringing to the table. You know, I was more positive on those moves than I'm going to be on this move, right? I'm not down on this move. It's just kind of mad to me. I've been kind of mentally and emotionally preparing myself since last week when we talked about Tua being an option for the Falcons. And the more I sat here and let it marinate in my head all week long, I'm like, yeah, this is probably what's going to happen for the Atlanta Falcons. And it's just kind of like, it's fine. We'll explain why I just come away where it's fine, as opposed to loving this move, hating this move. I'm sure many of you right now listening or watching this show or find yourself in one of the camps, and we'll see where you feel over the next 30 minutes after we talk about it. But let's talk about why the Falcons chose Tua Tagovailoa. It is because he's cheap, and they're going to get pretty good bang for their buck. They're going to sign him to a 1-year, $1.3 million deal for the veteran minimum type of contract, because he's owed like $50 million, or he's owed $50 million in guarantees from the Dolphins this season. So they'll be paying him a bunch of money, and he can basically play on a veteran minimum contract. And, you know, Atlanta's the best place for him because of the perception, rightfully, that he struggles in cold weather, and Atlanta and basically Arizona were like the only 2 places that he could realistically go where he wouldn't have to play a significant amount of games in cold weather. But, you know, I think this move kind of also threads the needle, right, when it comes to who's the best quarterback that we can get, right, but also won't necessarily nail the coffin shut on Michael Penix here in Atlanta, right? If the Falcons were able to sign Kyler Murray or Geno Smith or Malik Willis, right, those guys are either too old, too good, or too expensive, right? That if you're signing one of those guys, more than likely you're punting on Penix this upcoming season. And Joe Flacco, one of the alternative options that we discussed and we thought was probably the front runner, is probably not good enough to keep the job, right? He's probably not good enough to win you games. Since that 2023 late season run that he had with the Browns that helped them go to the postseason, Flacco's 4-12 as a starter in this league. And, if the goal is to stink and get a high draft pick next year, Flacco would be a perfect pick for that. But I don't think that's the goal that the Falcons are looking to achieve this upcoming season. And Tua should definitely outperform 4 wins, 4-12. And, the question is going to be, can you get to 9 or 10 wins with Tua? And that's going to be a major question, but I don't know. I'm not convinced that you are going to be able to get to that path. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why later in the episode. And so I think you have a potential to pivot to Penix, a month or 2 into the season with little to no regrets. Now, the other factor in why the Falcons chose Tua is seemingly, we're connecting the dots here. We haven't heard officially how Kevin Stefanski thinks about it, but we're just connecting the dots. And it seems like Kevin Stefanski loves him some Tua, right? The whole decision behind drafting Dylan Gabriel in the third round and quote unquote reaching on Dylan Gabriel last year, ahead of Shador Sanders and ahead of a lot of other quarterbacks that most people thought was better than Dylan Gabriel. I personally like Dylan Gabriel as a prospect, but purely as a backup quarterback. Like he's going to be a guy that's going to play 15 years in the NFL, but as a backup, not as a starter. Kevin Stefanski, Dylan Gabriel is essentially a poor man's Tua. And seemingly now he's getting the real thing in Tua Tagovailoa, and this seems to be the type of quarterback that Kevin Stefanski wants, right? And we've talked before last week when we talked about Tua, where the best version of Tua, like you're potentially getting the 12th best quarterback in the NFL when he's out there, wheeling and dealing and being his highly efficient game manager self that we saw at his peak in Miami. Now, the question is, of course, if you're not getting that version of Tua, you're getting something closer to the 20th best quarterback in the league. And that's basically kind of where the Falcons have been for the last, 5 years, is getting 20th level quarterback play or right around that number. But again, they're not spending $180 million on that, right? So that's a big plus there. So the question is going to be, is this, signing going to move the needle any more significantly than the last, 6 quarterbacks that have been here in the building, including Matt Ryan, over the last 5 years? Probably not. Now, again, if it was my personal opinion, I think Geno probably would have moved the needle a little bit more. Now, Geno might be cooked, but if you can get the Seattle version of Geno instead of the Raiders version of Geno, like that's a guy I think gives you a better chance to get to 9 or 10 wins. But, I'm sure many of you are screaming at your phones or your computers or televisions or whatever you're watching me on, being like, Geno, how can you say that with a straight face, blah, 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 right? That's the challenge of this offseason. There was no perfect solution for the Atlanta Falcons, right? Every single quarterback, even better quarterbacks than Tua, whether you think Geno or Malik Willis or Kyler Murray or those guys or other guys, none of those guys were going to come here and we would be like, yep, that's a slam dunk home run move at the quarterback position. The Falcons are simply looking for a bridge. And unlike the previous bridge in Kirk Cousins, this one is a pretty cheap bridge. And it's basically we know how this league works, right? You get a player's coach and then you get a hardline coach and then you get a player's coach, right? You went cheap at quarterback with Desmond Ridder. You went really expensive at quarterback with Kirk Cousins. And now you're going cheap again. And guess what? If the Falcons find themselves in a situation to get a quarterback in the near future, they're probably going to be more willing to pay a premium for that quarterback. That's just how the NFL works. You tend to be very reactive and you swing one pendulum to one end to the other when it comes to decisions and whatnot. And so hopefully we'll see Kevin Stefanski and Tommy Rees get more out of Tua than what we've seen the last 2 years from Tua. And then 9 or 10 wins in a successful playoff season is potentially on the horizon for the Atlanta Falcons in 2026. And we know that the Falcons offense is going to focus on running the football. We know or believe that the Falcons defense is going to continue to make strides and hopefully will be a top half of the league defense. And that's a formula that if you can run the football like a top 5, top 10 run defense, and if you can put together a top 10-ish, top 12-ish defense this upcoming season, all Tua Tagovailoa has to do is manage the game, and you can win a lot of football games playing that style of football. And so a lot of our focus this offseason is going to be, can the Falcons play that style of football with a high-powered run game, a high-powered defense, as opposed to thinking that the quarterback is going to be the engine behind the offense. But Tua is good enough to manage the game. We'll break down the strengths and weaknesses in terms of what type of engine we're getting in this offense in the passing game from Tua. And, maybe we've come to the conclusion that Tua is just kind of a cheaper do-over of Kirk Cousins, and we'll break down why that is as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. It is tax time, but for a lot of us, the old way of doing taxes is a lot. You're trying to book an appointment that's not the most convenient, sitting in a waiting room with a stack of papers, emailing back and forth, wondering if they really get your situation. But this year, you're getting a major upgrade. Intuit TurboTax now has in-person locations nationwide. You can meet face-to-face with a real tax expert, and your documents get uploaded straight to your TurboTax app on the spot. And just like that, you're done. Your TurboTax expert works to get you every dollar you deserve, and all the while you get real-time notifications as you go about your day. It's the relief of walking in and meeting a real person and walking out knowing your taxes are being handled right. Head to turbotax.com/local to find a store near you and book your appointment today. So we are here in the midst of free agency, and it's time for you guys to get a perk from this. In addition to all the great content we're providing here on Locked On Falcons, you can join the Everydayer Club and get 1 month free with the code free agency, no spaces, through March 15th. Go ad free, get and keep the conversation going in the Locked On Podcast Network Discord by joining the Everydayer Club at the link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. And again, use that promo code free agency to get a free month. So when we talk about the pros and cons of Tua's, let's talk about the strengths of Tua, right? The thing that you always hear about Tua is he's a high-level processor. Now, I don't know if that means that Tua is a great decision maker. We'll explain why in a second with some of the turnovers. But it's mostly that Tua is going to be able to get the ball out quickly. That if you're going to be able to operate a scheme that operates highly off of quick game, right? And you have a play caller that is going to be able to consistently scheme open that first read quickly, your offense can cook with Tua Tagovailoa, right? We have 4 straight seasons of Tua where he has the fastest time to throw in the NFL, according to PFF. And in the 2 previous years where he was a starter, not counting his rookie season where he was in and out of the lineup and all that stuff, right? Coming off an injury and also a rookie, so not necessarily fair to judge him by. He was still top 5 in lowest time to throw. So getting the ball out quickly, right? Kirk Cousins, up there when it comes to time to throw. Matt Ryan in his heyday was also a guy known for getting the ball out quickly. The other thing that Tua is good at is he's good at attacking the middle of the field. Had a 61% success rate, according to True Media, on throws between the numbers over the last 4 years combined. Now you compare that to Michael Penix, who had a 60% success rate on those throws. But the difference is Penix doesn't throw those passes with frequency, right? Penix is near the bottom of the league in terms of attempting those throws between the numbers over the last 2 seasons, while Tua over the last 4 seasons is near the top in the league, 6th most per in terms of between the number throws per game over that 4-year period of time. And we saw Mike McDaniel have a lot of success operating that style of offense, quick throws, attacking the middle of the field, scheming things open for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle over the middle of the field, using those guys' speed, using a lot of motions to create space over the middle of the field with wide open windows that Tua was able to hit at a high level. Now, that gets us to our main weaknesses with Tua, right? Tua admitted last year that he would often throw blindly over the middle. That gets us to why I'm talking about, I don't know if the processing is as great as we often, as that implies when you say, oh, he's a high-level processor. He's just kind of see it, throw it, and oftentimes not seeing it. And that led to a bunch of interceptions, particularly last year, a career-high 15 picks, 25 turnover-worthy plays, according to PFF, the most in his NFL career. His turnover-worthy play rate was 5.4, which was the 3rd highest in the NFL last season, and that eclipses the 4.6 rate that Kirk Cousins had in 2024 when he was near the top of the league. And again, turnover-worthy play rate is not just counting interception, passes that should have been picked off, but also fumbles. And Tua is also a fumbler like Kirk, right? Not quite to the degree of Kirk, but he's right there neck and neck with Kirk Cousins. Since 2020, Kirk has fumbled once every 58 dropbacks. Tua has fumbled once every 60 dropbacks over that same period of time. And part of that is owed to Tua's struggles to create off structure, which is, again, similar to Kirk Cousins, as we sat here watching Kirk Cousins sit as a statue in the pocket, right? And that brings challenges when teams are successfully able to provide pressure, right? We talk about the quarterback needing to make you right when it comes to play calling and successful offense, right? Where the quarterback needs to have the ability that when the play breaks down, when receivers don't get open, that first read isn't there, you need your quarterback to be able to extend plays outside the pocket, buy your receivers more time to get open, or to go and get 5, 10, 15 yards with his legs if need be. That's not going to be Tua Tagovailoa, which is very similar to Kirk Cousins. Right. And so if the Falcons are going to be right on offense, it's going to be more about the play caller here with Tua here in the building, and then you couple that with the receivers that the Falcons had. I think OZ and Dotson are upgrades to what the Falcons were getting out of Darnell Mooney and the rest of the wide receiver core last year. But I don't think these are guys that you're going to basically expect, okay, go get open and make us right every single time on the football field. That's going to be Drake London or bust, as with the Falcons offense is currently constructed. It's like, if Drake don't get open, this offense, it's going to be tough, right? And that's going to be similar to what we saw. Again, it can be better than what we saw in 2025, but it's going to be similar to what we saw in 2025 based off of the current construction of the roster. But obviously, we got a lot of time to go where they can continue building up that receiver core. But when it comes to Tua versus pressure, he struggled, especially this past year. I remember that Week 8 game when the Falcons were able to get the pressure in that game. You saw Tua's effectiveness really drop off of a cliff, right? Which is, not surprising for most quarterbacks. You see that, like I charted it with his success rate was 60% when he was clean and 30% when he was pressure, which again, those numbers aren't too dissimilar from what is common in the NFL. But when he was blitzed in that specific game, right, he had a success rate of 25% compared to the 55% success rate that Tua had when he wasn't blitzed. And to me, that was something that Tua really struggled with this past year in 22 and 23. When he was at his peak in Miami, he was one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL versus the blitz based off of PFF grades. And it's why you hear me talk about Tyreek Hill's impact when we were talking about Mike McDaniel potentially being a replacement for Zach Robinson back in October, November, whenever that was. And I was like, yeah, well, like Mike McDaniel, can he prove that he's a good play caller without Tyreek Hill? Because for the most part, that when Tyreek Hill wasn't being one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, like he was in 22 and 23, that was a very ordinary offense, right? And, you saw similar issues with Tua these past 2 years where, in a lot of ways, is he a Tyreek Hill merchant? And, 2022 version of Tyreek Hill isn't coming through that door. Now, you might get a 2026 version of Tyreek Hill coming through that door, but that's a shell of the player that he was 3 and 4 years ago. Tua also tends to take a lot of sacks. His pressure to sack rate over the last 2 years is 22%. That's the same as Desmond Ritter's pressure to sack rate that he had in 2023 compared to Kirk Cousins' 15% over the last 2 years. Kirk just does a better job of getting rid of the ball when the pressure is there. Now, there are going to be limitations because Tua is not going to be that mobile in the pocket, right? And Tua, unlike Michael Penix, and these are issues with Michael Penix as well, but unlike Michael Penix, Tua doesn't have a big-time arm, which is another knock on Tua, which is why the perception is that he can't play in cold weather because he can't drive the ball down the field. And so, to me, it all kind of just screams that the Falcons are just kind of getting a left-handed version of Kirk Cousins. Now, he's younger, he's cheaper, but it's basically all the pros and cons that we've been discussing ad nauseum with Kirk Cousins over the last 2 years, right? Now, if you are of the opinion that Kirk's on-field play was more than fine, and your only beef with Kirk Cousins was the quote-unquote money that he stole from the Atlanta Falcons, then you probably think the Tua signing is brilliant, right? As I said, you go from the most expensive quarterback contract or free agent contract in NFL history from an outside free agent to the cheapest you can possibly pay, and so it's a win when it comes to that. And so if we are getting the version of Kirk Cousins that we've seen the last couple of years, are we getting the 2024 version or the 2025 version of Kirk Cousins? No, I tend to think it's going to be more the 2024 version of Kirk Cousins, which really was propped up by good wide receiver play. And one of the themes that we're going to be talking about as the offseason unfolds is a big part of Kevin Stefanski's success when you look back at his time in Cleveland was when he had, 2 or more weapons, or not just Cleveland, also Minnesota, when he had 2 good weapons, right? The best versions of his offense had 2 good weapons. And that's going to be a talking point as we continue to see the Falcons address their wide receiver position. But we did see Kirk Cousins be very effective, relatively effective. I should qualify it, guys. Relatively effective and efficient in the back half of the 2025 season, right? Helped by a good running game and a good defense from the Atlanta Falcons. And if you can scheme up a well-schemed play-action passing attack, and we believe Kevin Stefanski can do that, there is absolutely a world where, similar to Kirk Cousins, Tua Tagovailoa is winning football games, even if he isn't necessarily the reason that you're winning, similar to as we look at Kirk's, last, 7 starts here in Atlanta, where it's like, yeah, he's just managing the game and doing an effective job of that. But no one's going to sit here and be like, oh, the Falcons won that game because of how well Kirk Cousins played. And so if you can get that version of Tua or better with the supporting cast that the Falcons had, it's a welcome and potentially winning formula for the Falcons. But, winning is going to matter because that's going to factor into whether or not Tua can hold off Michael Penix. And we already have mentioned that Tua is the best option the Falcons could have gotten that necessarily won't be a meaningful threat to Michael Penix. So what does that mean for Michael Penix and his future? And we'll take a deeper look into that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. It's March, so we know that college basketball is going to be nonstop all month long. There are big games, tight spreads, and momentum swings every single night. And we have conference tournaments raging all week long. And so whether you're watching those games in Charlotte, Nashville, Chicago, or you're that sicko that's staying up late for that shootout in Boise, there's always action across the board. And now FanDuel is going to give you a way to turn that energy into an even bigger potential win with their college basketball parlay profit boost. You can build any college hoops parlay that you want, rivalry games, ranked matchups, whatever you like. You can mix in spreads, totals, and player props to match how you see the slate playing out. And then you can apply the profit boost and instantly bump up the potential payout. So go safe or go bold, go bold, or ride with the team you've been following all season long, or just whoever has the hottest hand. Jump on that bandwagon, whatever you want. It's your parlay, your style. You make the choices, and now you just have a little bit more upside behind it. So head on over to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game. So, of course, one of the other big talking points we're going to have for the next 6-ish months is when is Michael Penix going to come back? And we don't know. And he was recently on John Gruden's podcast saying, I'm going to be back for training camp. I'm going to be back for week 1. And, you guys know me. I'll believe it when I see it. Right? I expect him back sometime in August. Right? I was telling someone the other day that if it's closer to August 5th, he'll definitely have a chance to start week 1. If it's closer to August 25th, then he's probably going to miss at least the first few weeks of the season at minimum. And to me, I'm going to be operating with the assumption that Tua is going to be the week 1 starter. Right? Now, unless Penix can make that early return and really push him in camp, Tua is going to be the starter because he's going to get all, if not, the bulk, if not all of the first team reps throughout the offseason, throughout the start of training camp, assuming Penix isn't healthy. Right. And it's unlikely that the Falcons, once they clear Penix, is like, he's going to start taking all the first team reps. Right. And we've talked about this a ton over the years when it's come to, quarterback competitions. Right. We don't really, at least here on this podcast, I can't speak for the rest of the world. We don't really believe in quarterback competitions. They don't really work or benefit anybody. Right. Splitting the reps. You can't build cohesion in your offense. And if we're going to get the best version of either one of these quarterbacks this upcoming season, you got to build that cohesion. And because this unknown status of Penix, all the reasons point to Tua getting those first team reps to try to maximize his chances of building cohesion with this new receiver core in a brand new offense and all that sort of stuff. So again, I'm going to operate as we sit here today. And again, we'll see if things change in the coming months, but I'm going to operate as we sit here today that Tua is going to be the week 1 starter. And of course, his ability to retain that spot beyond week 1 is going to depend on the team's performance, as well as his performance, as well as the timetable for Penix's recovery from that knee injury. And if the Falcons are winning games and Tua is performing reasonably well, then he's going to hang on to that job even when Penix is ready. If he's not winning games and not performing well, then it's going to be time to pump, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll be back to Michael Penix. But, I sit here suspecting, we'll get a month or two into the season and the Falcons will be at or just below 500. We'll still be in the hunt, and we'll be having a daily, weekly, whatever conversation about, is it time that we should pivot to Penix, right? And the question is going to be, there's going to be a point in the season where it's going to be too late for the Falcons to pivot to Penix. I need to be able to say that correct. Pivot to Penix, right? Much like we experienced in 2022 and 2024, where the Falcons had a bridge quarterback in Mariota, pivoted to Desmond Ridder too late in the season with 4 games left. Same thing in 24 with Kirk Cousins. Now, Kirk Cousins wasn't a bridge. I mean, he was a bridge, but he was a very expensive bridge that was supposed to last 2 years. But we got to a point where it was time to pivot off of him with 3 games left. But you left not enough games on the table to fairly evaluate Ridder or Penix. And it's going to beg the question, what is the amount of games that Michael Penix needs to start and play in 2026 so that we can give him a fair evaluation to determine whether or not he's the quarterback of the future? And again, I don't know what that answer is. And I'm sure, as we go through the next several months here on the podcast, I'll have many guests on the podcast and basically ask them that exact question. How many games do you need to see from Michael Penix this season to feel good about moving in the direction for him or pivoting completely off of him in 2027? And again, I don't know the answer, but as I kind of sit here today and again, just kind of spitballing, I'm like, 12 games seems like a fair amount. And so are we going to get 12 games of Penix this year and only 5 games of Tua, right? We didn't get that for Ridder in 22. We didn't get that for Penix in 24. And to me, that left you wanting going into 23 and 2025 with both of those quarterbacks. And are we going to be sitting here going into 2027 with a similar pit in our stomach being like, well, Penix might be the answer, but we still need another year to figure that out, right? You kind of want to have that answer by the end of the season. And so understandably, I can understand why many of you, and I have the same feeling, it kind of feels like this edition feels very deja vu-ish, right? It just feels like, oh, we're just kind of doing some of the same things that we've been doing the last couple of years. And as we often say, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and thinking you're going to get a different result. And we talked about this before on the podcast. The biggest challenge, the biggest goal, the biggest achievement that Kevin Stefanski can pull off here in Atlanta is to be able to break the cycle of mediocrity that this team has been in for the last 8 years and stabilize his quarterback position. And as we sit here today, I'm not confident Tua is going to be that answer. I'm not confident Michael Penix is going to be that answer. And Tua feels like more of the same of what we experienced over the last couple of years, with a sliver of a chance he could be more of that and be the answer at the quarterback position. Penix is also kind of feels like more of the same to what we've experienced the last couple of years, but it feels like there's at least more than a sliver of a chance that he could be more than that, right? Because if we can get Penix comfortable attacking the middle of the field with more frequency, similar to Tua Tagovailoa, and it feels like by the Falcons acquiring Tua, that is going to be a point of emphasis in this offense. And we get Penix to hit those deep shots that we didn't get him to hit last year, right? With that bigger arm that Tua has, there is higher ceiling potential with Michael Penix at the helm of this offense than there is with Tua. But we will see if that potential delivers in terms of reality, if we get that ceiling, if we get a lower floor, all those things. So it's March 9th. Lots of things will happen between now and then, and we'll change our opinion on things. And so we'll see how we feel about the Falcons quarterback situation on May 9th after the draft. We'll see how we feel about it on August 9th, a couple of weeks into the training camp. We will see about how we feel about it on September 9th when the regular season kicks off on that Thursday night opener. And then we will see subsequently on around January 9th, which is, I think, the day before the regular season ends in 2027, on how we feel about the Falcons quarterback situation. But I don't think the Falcons are done at quarterback since Tua and Penix are both injury prone. We've talked about they're needing to add a third viable option at the quarterback position. Is that going to be a veteran? Is that going to be a draft pick? I doubt it's going to be Joe Flacco, who wants to go somewhere where he can actually play, and it doesn't seem like that's going to be necessarily on the table with Tua here in the fold. But I'm sure we will explore those potential third quarterback options down the road. But in the immediate future, we will discuss the other signing that the Falcons made on Monday in Cam Thomas, the defensive end, formerly of the Cleveland Browns, on your next episode. And we'll see if we get some other late night signings on Monday night that we can talk about on that next show come Tuesday afternoon on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Continue to subscribe to Locked On Falcons so you don't miss that. Check out Locked On NFL if you want to catch up on all the big moves going on around the NFL, as well as Locked On NFL Draft to see how free agency is going to impact the draft, various teams' draft boards at the top of the draft. And also check that out. If you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. You get Locked On Falcons ad-free, plus members-only Discord access, and so much more. Head to the link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com to join the club. And of course, remember to use that coupon code FREEAGENCY with no spaces, and you will get 1 month free of the Everydayer Club. It is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.